This is a video about an oil pan baffle. It's also a video about the inevitable escalation of work that often happens when building a car. The goal was to install a baffle in my engine to prevent oil starvation during track days in my K20 all-wheel drive Civic. Sounds easy on the surface. Take the oil pan off, bolt on the baffle, put the pan back on. Nope. Here's how it went instead. This is a Circuit Hero oil pan baffle made for the Honda K-Series engine. It's listed as being compatible with most K-Series engines, including the JDM K20A. I've been wanting to change out the factory aluminum pan anyway to avoid breaking it open by accident. So I got a steel pan from K-Tuned which works with all K-Series engines and figured I'd be good to go. I found the oil capacity to be pretty much the same between the two pans at around 4.5 quarts. Mocking up the baffle in the pan, I didn't see any obvious issues, so I got to work, assuming I could knock it out in a couple of hours. As soon as I drop the factory pan off the block, I run into problem number one. The oil pump on a CL7 K20A is just like the one on a K24 with balance shafts and all, which isn't compatible with the baffle I bought. But I thought it said it was compatible with the JDM K20A. Well, there are effectively two different iterations of the engine labeled K20A. There's the one from the EP3 or DC5 chassis, and the one from the CL7 chassis, which is the one I have. I knew this beforehand, but for some reason my ego assumed I could make it work. This K20A from the Accord Euro R is quite different. It has a different oil pump with balance shafts, different cylinder head, intake manifold, even the crank sensor, and of course, the oil pan. For all intents and purposes, it's basically a de-stroked K24. It's built for the heavier Accord chassis and tuned for smoother, broader torque delivery across the rev range. All that to say, the baffle isn't quite as bolt-on as I thought it would be. So, first things first, I need to swap out the massive Euro R oil pump for an RSX style one. And you all know how it goes. While I'm at it, I might as well get a good one. So because I always try to bulletproof things when I have the chance, I ordered a 4-piston ported oil pump that will flow even better than the stock RSX pump. Luckily, it's compatible with all K-Series engines. At the direction of 4-piston tech support, I ordered the new pump with the K20Z3 install kit that includes the necessary parts to make the swap, including a new windage tray that covers the spot where the original Euro R pump sits, as well as the correct oil pump chain and guide, which are both different than my stock units. Swapping to an RSX K20 pump is pretty common on K24 builds, so luckily there are options that make it pretty simple, although definitely not cheap.
Damn.
Since the oil pump covers about 2/3 of the block, it uses a 3-piece windage tray, 2 of which are attached to the girdle and the other one directly to the pump. Those come off and go directly in the scrap pile. As soon as I take the stock pump off, I take care of this oil pump jet. It's used to maintain pressure on the RBC and RBB oil pumps for the balance shafts, but you need to remove it in order for the RSX style pump to work properly. I remove the jet with a drywall screw and then dig out an M8 bolt long enough to plug the threaded hole. An aluminum crush washer will seal against the block surface to prevent oil coming through the port, and since oil pressure is critical to maintain a healthy engine, I put some Honda Bond on the threads for good measure. The bolt goes into the same hole the jet was removed from and gets tightened to some completely made up spec on the fly. Sometimes my subconscious just knows the answer and I don't bother arguing. The oil pump chain for the new K20 style pump has 2 more links than the stock Euro R chain, so unfortunately for me, swapping it out is mandatory. It's unfortunate because the oil pump chain rides behind the timing chain, so changing it out requires pulling the timing chain off. Pulling the timing chain requires taking the front cover off, which in turn requires the valve cover and the passenger engine mount to come off. That means the strut bar, exhaust bracket, ignition coils, and engine harness come off as well for access. Since the engine mount has to be removed, that side of the engine needs to be supported somehow, so that means a carefully placed floor jack and rubber pad directly on the lower engine girdle because the oil pan is off and there's nowhere else to put it. There happens to be a coolant line that wraps around the timing cover for the oil cooler, which will need to be removed, so the coolant needs to be drained. Oh god, I'm gonna have to take it off. I fucking know it. With the timing cover off, I might as well inspect the chain and guides, which luckily turn out to have very little sign of wear since this engine has pretty low miles, being straight from Japan. Finally, you can see why all of this work is necessary just to swap the pump. The oil pump chain just can't be removed without the timing chain coming off first. Doing a timing job with the engine in the car is pretty difficult with the tight clearances everywhere, but there's just no way I'm pulling the engine to install an oil pan baffle, so I just deal with it. With the timing components inspected, I hang the new oil pump chain on the crank gear. The new pump requires a different chain guide that came with the install kit, so that goes on next. The old chain and gear have timing marks on them to sync the factory balance shafts up to the rest of the rotating assembly, but the new pump doesn't have balance shafts, so the chain and gears can just go on without matching up any marks. Then I lock both cams at the opposite ends using Allen keys in the holes here. And reinstall the guides, timing chain, and tensioner, making sure everything is lined up properly with the black links on the marks at both cam gears and the lower timing gear. This has to be done with cylinder 1 at TDC, which luckily I happened to land on by some miracle because I definitely forgot to set that before I removed the timing chain. I know, so many fails in this video already, and we're just getting started. Trust me, there will be more. I opt to reuse the timing components, except for arguably the most important part, the tensioner. Since I'm in there, I replaced the factory unit with a 4-piston tensioner with a mechanical failsafe that holds the tension in the event of an oil pressure failure, which may or may not be a thing that happens in my next video, so why not subscribe for more failures? I meticulously clean the mating surfaces of the timing cover and engine block with brake cleaner and Scotch-Brite. Remove and reseal the tensioner window, cover plate, and prep the parts for reinstallation. I install a new crank seal with a factory replacement, as well as this gasket here for the coolant port. I rotate the engine through several revolutions to make sure everything stays tight and feels normal, and then apply Honda Bond and throw the timing cover back on. Torque everything down, and stand back to admire the perfection of the gray ooze. Now I can finally get back down to the oil pan and start putting the new parts on. But the floor jack is still in the way, so I have to put the engine mount and bracket back on first. I mock up the oil pump to make sure it fits, and I can get the chain over the gear without the oil chain tensioner on. Luckily it fits, and the new factory spec bolts that came in the kit fit as well. Then I take it back off. The windage tray has to go on first, but it can't be bolted up quite yet because the baffle attaches using the same fasteners as the windage tray. The baffle comes with studs that get installed in place of the windage tray bolts, so I apply Loctite and thread them onto the block girdle. These spacers then slip over each of the studs to space the baffle down off the windage tray to prevent contact. According to the directions, you're supposed to place the included nut retainers over the studs to keep the spacers from falling off while you install the baffle. But the included retainers are not the right kind, so they just fall off and make me even more angry than I already am. And since the engine is not upside down on a stand, if I want to get this done today, I have to find some magical way to hold 6 spacers against the law of gravity while I bolt up the baffle. I only have 2 hands, but luckily I'm a problem-solving machine, so I grab some Honda Bond and use it on the underside of the spacers to temporarily hold them up while I fit the baffle over the studs and get a couple nuts on to hold it loosely in place. At this point, I have to get the oil pump back on, and slipping it in between the baffle proves more difficult than it should. The pump can't go on first because the windage tray has to go on first. But the windage tray can't go on by itself because the baffle has to go on with it since they use the same fasteners. But then if you put the baffle on all the way, you can't get the oil pump on because it has dowels and a gear that needs to mesh into the chain that's already installed. So at this point, I have no idea what order to go in, and I just start collapsing into curses and the mental paralysis that comes after 2 days of work on a project you thought was going to take 2 hours. But I snap myself out of it and eventually get all 3 components, baffle, tray, and pump, attached using only 2 hands. I have to bend part of the baffle to clear the pump housing in the back here, which is easy to do since the metal is soft aluminum, but it's also a little annoying because it's supposed to just bolt up. I torque everything down and admire my work. Only one thing left to do here, and that's bolt up the pan. Since it's steel, the flange is much thinner than the factory aluminum pan, so it comes with shorter bolts to attach it to the block. Honda Bond goes on around the pan, and I get back under there to bolt it up, only to meet some mysterious resistance that won't allow the pan to seat up against the block all the way. This can't be happening. The pan is contacting the baffle somewhere, so I mark the baffle with a paint marker and see where it transfers onto the inside of the pan, and add a few new bends to the baffles, but it's still not fitting. The baffle is contacting the front side of the pan and not allowing the rear side of the pan flange to line up correctly. Meanwhile, the Honda Bond is busy setting up, and I don't have the patience for this, so I go full trial and error mode. I break out the vice grips and the rubber mallet and go to town on this stupid baffle for the next 30 minutes. Eventually, I get it close enough and the pan goes on, but just barely, and only with extensive modification to the baffle. As a finishing touch, I add a factory Honda reinforcement brace to the block. The factory Euro R aluminum pan effectively has this brace built into it, but the new steel pan does not. I found out they come stock on CRVs, which is convenient because I have a CRV transmission and what I now know to be basically a CRV block, so I picked up a used brace off eBay for cheap and cleaned it up. The brace acts as reinforcement between the engine and transmission and functions as a flywheel cover as well. At this point, I have the valve cover off, so I might as well check the valve lash. Everything turns out to be within spec across the board, so I'm happy about that. Since we're coming up on summer track season, I swap out the 50-50 coolant mix for distilled water and water wetter. The general consensus is that this oil pump swap frees up anywhere between 3 and 5 horsepower. After driving it, I can definitely say it revs out quicker and pulls a little harder up top. Check out my upcoming track video to see for yourself. After all this, do I think it was worth the hassle to have an oil pan baffle? I think for the type of driving I do on the track, a baffle is a critical piece for longevity. I want this engine to last a long time. I did say there would be more of that, didn't I? When it comes to engine protection, a little effort and cost now will no doubt save me a lot of effort and cost down the road. It's not the most exciting or sexy mod, and it's not the first thing most people would think to spend money on, but when you add up all these little things, they do make a difference in the long run. I think a big part of the struggle of this project was parts compatibility and the misconception that all K20As are essentially the same when they're not. I think the Euro R is left out of a lot of compatibility descriptions when it comes to paint support, simply because it's less common. Fewer suppliers and retailers know the differences, so when you say something they're really just referring to the and that's how a simple oil pan baffle escalated into 3 days of work and a timing job I didn't want to do. If you want to see more of this or follow along with this build, maybe subscribe. And give me a thumbs up if this was entertaining. It's good for all of us. Stay tuned for some cool stuff coming this car season, and thanks for watching. See you out there.